Now I would also like to invite to the stage the President of Chile, which on a per capita basis has the strongest economy in Latin America and is leading the way in many, many areas, Michelle Bachelet. So the first thing I would like to ask you to do, and we'll start with President Bachelet, since we've already opened with Jordan. You came in 2006, and you had just been elected President of Chile. Then after your term, you became the first leader of UN Women from 2010 to 2013. And then you did such a good job the first time they brought you back. But what's different now and then in Latin America and the world? Why did you decide to run again? And how are the problems different? How are the opportunities different between now and what you did the first time?
Well, thank you, Bill. Happy to be here again. And we really appreciate what the Clinton Global Initiative is doing. I would like to start saying, why did I run again? Because I just couldn't help it. Maybe it's in my blood, in my milk bottle, the word responsibility. But let me go directly to your question. And maybe a little bit even before I assumed in office in 2006. In 2000, 189 countries pledged, the Millennium Development Goals, trying to really improve the life of millions of people. And there was a lot of different areas, but one of the main goals was to reduce extreme poverty. And by 2010, it was attained, that goal, to reduce to half the rate on extreme poverty. But having said that, and I would say on the 8 goals of the MDGs, the majority has been sort of attained. But that doesn't mean that the world, the world is much better for millions of people, but still lacking behind a lot of them. 1 of 8 persons in the world still have hunger. 1.2 billion people still are in poverty, and so on. And 2 of the goals that did not do well, it's ensuring education for all, and the second is environmental sustainability. So now in the 2015, the world community will have to decide what new goals, what are the new objectives that we should put all together to be able to improve people's life. And there will be interesting discussions. And I think in the central part of it, inequality is still the main issue. So how we build a much more inclusive, not only global community, and of course at each country. And in Chile, in my case, it was new what I found since the first term and the second term. Because even though we have progress a lot, people understand that progress means we need to improve in many different areas, like education, health, pensions, et cetera, at the same time ensuring that the economy grows, but that we can ensure well-being for all our citizens. So I would say we have improved and we have done well in some issues, but there's still so much to do. And you were talking about Jordan and the Syrian refugees and so on. And when we look not only at the social problems, but when we look at the crisis and conflict we see out the world, there are many different factors that explain that. But I think it's also the difficulties for society to include. And when I'm talking to include, I mean political inclusion, religious inclusion, and of course, social inclusion. So I think we can have peacekeeping operations and a lot of things, but we need to tackle the roots of and the structural problems that are producing this conflict. So if we want a world in peace, we need to advance much more in a more inclusive and just world for all.
Your Majesty, All we have to do is to watch the news and read the papers to know about all the problems now gripping the Middle East, not just in Syria and Iraq, but the controversy over Iran's nuclear program, all the difficult war conflict in Gaza that just concluded, what's happening in Egypt, its ups and downs, and its future now. Tell us something positive. What should the world know about the potential of the Middle East based on what's actually going on that can't possibly find its way into a headline now because of all the trouble? What do you want us to know positive about Jordan? What do you want us to know positive about the region?
Well, I used to say to all the delegations that used to come to Jordan that it can't get any worse, but I've stopped saying that. Look, the good story is, I think, is that, and the challenge at the same time is 60% of the country is under the age of 30. And for small countries like Jordan, that's a positive thing. We have a young population, highly educated, tech-savvy, that has been very resilient. I mean, if you look at the history of Jordan, for many decades, the country that is initially always sort of written off is Jordan. And it's not by accident that over many decades, Jordan has survived all the shocks that the region has produced. And it's because of the people. And so as we have seen over the past 2 years, 3 years, we looked at Arab Spring, which was a major crossroad for the Arabs. And as opposed to revolution, it was evolution. We managed to move forward. And as a result, opened our doors, which is the natural way of things that happen in Jordan. We've been a country that's always welcomed refugees because it's the right thing to do. You did mention the tremendous burden that we have in our country. But with the tremendous economic burdens, the economy is coming back. Everybody says to us, we're just shocked that Jordan is doing what it's doing, suffering as it's suffering, but we're still keeping our heads above water. And I think that's the secret of Jordan. Part of it is because there is this relationship between the private sector and the public sector. We have invested in our youth. There's a lot of programs that are going on now between the private sector and public sector in PPPs. There's a lot of investment coming into Jordan. But the other side of the story is, unless we get help by the international community on the burden of refugees, which is affecting the government of Jordan. Last year, for example, most of the aid that comes from the international community and from donors, which is extremely appreciated, only accounts for about 39% of the aid that we need. The rest is the burden on the Jordanian economy. This year, the burden of Syrian refugees is going to be about $3 billion. So again, we're probably going to expect only 40% of aid coming from outside is going to cover that. So how can we balance this dichotomy of the burden of Syrian refugees to the economy that is growing back? And how do we give faith to the young people that need to come into the workforce? And when I say that 60% of the country is under the age of 30, it's the same thing across the Middle East. So when I reach out and look to people around the room, this is the challenge that I think all of us have. It's not just Jordan, it's how do we give the hope and promise to the youth globally, and Chile is another example, but to youth of the Middle East that feel that they've been abandoned. And this is where we have to get it wrong. I mean, the challenge, as you just alluded to, is not just Syria and Iraq. It's Lebanon. It's in the Sinai. It's Libya. We're seeing it in Yemen. We're seeing it in Nigeria, Somalia. So as we're talking about the politics of a coalition over this week in the United Nations, we are looking at Syria and Iraq, but we have to look at the other elephants in the room. It has to be a comprehensive approach. President Obama understands this, but it's how do we bring it together to look at a comprehensive fight, which it really is, between good and evil, and giving the younger generation the promise that we do care about them and their future. Just one sort of sideline of information. As we try to create jobs and opportunities for the youth, ISIS today is providing foreign fighters $1,000 a month in salaries, which to people in Jordan is the equivalent of middle class to higher middle class income. If we don't get this right, if we don't step up to this moral responsibility, how are we going to be able to combat this experience, this extremism? So it's something that is now global. We're all invested in it. It's no longer a fight that we're fighting inside of the Middle East. If you're looking at the issue of foreign fighters coming in from all over the world, as far as China, we're all in this together. And so this is a global fight. Jordan has got a good story to talk about. But as you said, sometimes we're taking it for granted. There's going to be a lot of pressure on Jordan to be able to stand up politically and militarily, because we are the trusted neighbor in being able to help the Syrians and the Iraqis. But what we're asking the international community is, please watch our back. We can't do everything by ourselves. And if we don't help our economy, then how much more responsibilities can we do by ourselves without the international community coming to our aid? We will always do the right thing, but how much can we continue to do without everybody really coming and taking us?
Let me ask you something. You've got your whole crew there that did all this work on coming up with this plan, and I want to thank all the Jordanians here who did that. But give the crowd here, there's a lot of people here who are just hearing all this the first time and haven't really thought about it. If you could wave a magic wand and guarantee investment and aid flows into the country at the appropriate levels in the next 3 years or so, what do you want most from all of these people? What would be the best outcome from your point of view?
Well, we have a lot of programs that are, well, there's a lot of PPP opportunities. There's $10 billion of programs that are being launched as we speak. Again, your advice to me 10 years ago is to really invest in alternative energy. This is something that's a niche market for Jordan. ICT, we're the big leaders of that in the Middle East. Jordan is the basis, is the base for healthcare and medicine. It's high-tech, creative industries, high-tech vocational training. So what we're looking for is companies that are interested in those innovative industries to come in and help create jobs. But also be able to use Jordan as a center, especially in alternative energies, that can help other countries. I mean, we went to Tesla, for example, to convince them, because they were not interested in looking at the Middle East market, because they think that the whole Middle East are oil-rich countries. And we said, well, look at Jordan, look at Palestine, look at Syria, look at Iraq, look at Egypt, look at other countries. Invest in Jordan, because Jordan could be the gateway to a lot of other countries in alternative energy. So creating that capability to use Jordan as the nucleus to then be able to expand to other countries using our talent, that's, I think, the style that we're looking for. So in the sectors that I basically mentioned, all of you that are out there that feel that Jordan is the gateway, I mean, we have an access through our FTAs to 1 billion consumers. There's a 350 million regional market that we have access to. And geographically, good and bad, we are a gateway to so many different directions. And Jordan is now seeing investment into those sectors that actually you pushed us into in the right direction. And so from that point of view, Mr. President, when we started that meeting we had back in May, we've already gotten people in those alternative energy, ICT, and other sectors that are coming in to sort of give bids to Jordan.
Well, there's a huge opportunity there, also for wind as well as solar. And I was glad to hear what you said about Iraq, because a lot of these oil-producing countries that have been through troubled times, not just in the Middle East, but we'll talk about Iraq, would be far better off electrifying their own countries with solar, wind, biomass, whatever, so that they can export their production and earn cash, because they need it. They got a lot of ground to make up. But I thank you for that. Let me ask you a related question. You did this UN Women's job, and here you are, the first female president to do a second term, maybe anywhere in the world. And we're going to, looks like for sure, have 4 more years of a female president of Brazil, the biggest country in Latin America, because the 2 contestants, interestingly enough, both of which came out of different social reform movements in Brazil, are competing with each other in what to an outsider is a fascinating race. What lesson should we draw from this? I can tell you this, most of the rest of the world thinks of Latin America as a real macho place and are really surprised that they're doing so much better than a lot of people who think they're more enlightened on such matters. So what does it mean? Does it mean anything? Does it just happen by accident that the most talented people just happen to be women? Or is there more space now for women to live up to their leadership potential in politics? And if so, how did it happen and what does it mean?
Well, I think both issues are true. But we should not misunderstand what's going on. I also won the second run competing with a female candidate. That was first time in Chile. And probably I'm the first president re-elected, I mean, not immediately, from the 20s in my country. It's not very frequent. But having said that, if you look at Chile, for example, you have a female president of the Republic, a female president of the Senate, a female president of the biggest trade union, a group of confederation of trade unions. The 2 biggest universities, the heads of them are girls too. So there is a lot of space now that there's not possibility sort of a veto for female in the country. But on the other hand, we're still so far away where we should go. And there's still a lot of macho men in Latin America. So it's not the perfect world for women still, it's not. But I think we have been, but I think, and I've always thought that in terms of gender equality and women's empowerment, it was very important, of course, to work on economic empowerment, work on social and reproductive rights, work on all kinds of issues. But political empowerment is essential. And symbolic things are essential because when there's no women in a high-level position, people can talk about equal rights, but it was just, a speech. But when you see that women are able to be in very important positions and do it well, then it's a model for others. And it's a very important issue that could help other women to get into the places they deserve. And at least, as I always said, at least nobody will dare to say out loud, I don't believe in women, that women are capable. So I think in terms of how we empower women, because I think empowering women is important for the whole world, for women and men. We need to see some things that I've learned in life as a president, as a minister, and of course as executive director of UN Women. First is that women have still a lot of discrimination all over the world, in different cultures. Even countries you believe are the most advanced, still women still have gaps salary. They don't earn the same as men doing the same job. So there's a lot of things to do there. Still, even though Norway probably is one of the countries who started with 40% of women in the boards and the companies, and it was very successful, still this is not something that it's all over the world. You need to ensure that even though this happens, violence against women, it's all over the world, in different cultures. We need to tackle that issue. But then, even though every woman in the world don't have the same opportunities of men, one size does not fit all. We need to look at particularities, because probably what happens in some Middle East countries is different than Asia, Latin America, Europe, or the US. And the third thing is that the struggle of one woman is the struggle of the whole women of the world. So we need to continue working very strongly. And I do believe that this will mean a better world for all, for many reasons. When a woman has an income, 90%, it dedicates it of the income for health, house, schools, etc. We know that when a woman has an education, their children will have much more opportunities in the future. So when we are talking about empowering women and giving them the place they deserve, but also at the company level, when you have more women in different levels of decision-making positions, the company does better. So it's an issue of believing it. But the thing is, I ask myself, being executive director, because we have so much evidence. And Hillary, in a meeting on women's empowerment in California some years ago in the EPIC meeting, while she was Secretary of State, she did a fantastic presentation. But the thing is, you talk to many head of states, head of governments about this. They all say, yeah. But nothing happens really. So I've always asked myself, how are we able to build strong and, I would say, decisive arguments that will show how the world will be much better if men and women have equal rights and opportunities?
Thank you. Do you think there's been a significant increase in education, employment, and leadership opportunities for women in the Middle East in the last few years? And I believe there has, but I think maybe it would have more credibility if you would just comment on this specifically to.
There's still challenges, but I think a lot of it is similar, as Madam President, you said. When you look at the results from our high school annual testing, the girls always score higher than the boys. They graduate, the higher percentage are always the women. Going into university, the same story. Graduation, the highest levels are always the girls. But then we start to lose them the minute they go into the workplace. So part of it is, again, cultural, and this is something that we have to continue to fight. And a country our size can't afford to lose that level of talent. But again, it's some cultural issues that I think that we have to challenge. And again, so it's workplace, getting married, and then there's that sharp drop off. So this is some things that we have to continue to combat to push those envelopes. And also, where we see the, sort of some of the programs that work is obviously there's, the government is looking at how do we employ women better. SMEs have been very successful in giving women, especially out in the rural areas, their own power. Much more sensible at looking after the family paycheck than the men are. And you know, I've seen it in personal experiences of our combat women that went to Afghanistan. I mean, a very successful story of how capable they are. So we all know that they can do it, but it's just pushing the cultural norms, which is I think maybe the short answer that I can give you.
I know you have to go, but on the way out, I want to give you a chance to comment on one of your big initiatives now, which is you recognize the enormous prosperity that Chile has had relative to other countries in the region, and you ran for president saying that you wanted to reduce the inequalities that remained. You want more broadly shared prosperity. Involving women is a part of that, but it involves access to all the essential services and capital to get into business and all this. So what would you like this audience to know about, and by the way, Standard & Poor's, not some left-wing group, Standard & Poor's, that analyzes our whole stock market situation, issued a report saying that severe income inequalities in America was a substantial constraint on our long-term growth, and that it was this truth for other countries as well. So before you leave, just tell them what you want them to know, what you want us to know about what you're doing on the inequality issue.
Well, the first thing is that I always, when I talk to business people, I talk because we decided to tackle inequality, to do two sort of things. Some I would say very transformative and structural changes, and some, of course, daily changes on health, pension, and so on. But we understood that we needed to do 2 or 3 things. One was to make a very strong educational reform, because education for us is essential in both ways, because it will permit everyone not to lose, as the King Abdullah said, anyone's talent, but also it's also an economic challenge, because we need to improve our productivity, our competitiveness through innovation and more science and technology and so on. So I will believe that everybody wins when you have a human capital that is really strong and have the possibility not only to improve their lives, but also contribute to the society. And for us, in order to do that, we need to change the way education has been seen in our country. And I know that this might not be everyone agree with it. But in our country, we have full access to education. Everybody can go to education at the primary level, secondary level, and at the tertiary level, of course, it depends it's limited. What we want is not only access to education, because we do have access, but access to education maybe is the first step for countries who are far away from that goal. But for a country like Chile, that is a middle-income country, that has had a lot of success, that's not enough. So we need quality education for all. And quality education for all means in our country still that we need to change the paradigm behind the educational model. We need to ensure that quality education is the right for everyone. So we need to solve the issue of money, because in our country, families who have money can give good education to their children. But families who don't have enough money will receive the education they can have. So what we are trying to make is a reform that will ensure good and quality education for everyone. And that means a lot of steps like free of charge. But of course, that it's linked to a tax reform that we just approved. 5 months in government, we approve a tax reform that will mean 3% of the GDP to increase. And most of that will go to health and education particularly, to ensure not only from initial education, from 0 to tertiary education, access to education with high levels of quality. This is the way that we can tackle inequality, but also this is the way to really not lose anyone's contribution to the country. So one of the things that I've been discussing many times with the business community, because sometimes they see this agenda so bold and transformative, and they feel like it's a threat for them. And I said, you know what? The real threat in our country is that we don't tackle inequality. We have seen it all over the places in the world. People are so frustrated if they see the GDP is going up, but their lives are going down and are worse. That's the real threat, that we can continue, start with social riots, with social not cohesion. So the things I've been trying to do is how we ensure transformation that can really go into the direction of a better country for all, but do it on the same time with governance in peaceful way and the most constructive way. That's the kind of change that I'm trying to move forward in my country.
That's great. Thank you. Can you stay 2 minutes? I think we should let the president go. She's got to go to another meeting. Thank you so much.
Sorry, thank you very much for the feedback. King Abdullah, looking forward to see you.
I want to ask King Abdullah one more question that we have to wrap up. Let me say one thing about this whole inequality and women's empowerment issue, too. It's important not to forget that sometimes the most significant impact is held not just when a woman's elected president, but when there's something done at the bottom of the economic pyramid on the empowerment issue. For example, Bangladesh had years and years of constant conflict between 2 women leaders, so much so that it almost paralyzed the government, but they grew at an average of 6% a year because they had the most extensive microcredit network in the world, enough to actually lift huge numbers of people. Our foundation has a partner who was sitting right over there, Frank Justra. He's behind my camera, I can't see him. But he funds one of our programs in Latin America, which in Peru empowers women to become entrepreneurs for the first time in their lives in very poor Andean villages up in the mountains. And they deliver goods to the last mile that have never been available to people before. And all of a sudden, all these women who had no incomes become, by Peruvian standards, middle-class citizens. So I do think it's important when we get all carried away with the politics not to forget that the policy directed at people at the bottom of the pyramid is also very important. Now, Your Majesty, I want you to, I don't think you'll mind my asking you this, but one of the things that has complicated the whole political environment you've been operating in the last few years, as people see this rise of violence in the Middle East, the rise of terrorism, they think not all Muslims are terrorists, but most terrorists are Muslims. We have all this religious and cultural confusion. A few years ago, you made a heroic effort to basically change that perception by bringing together scholars of various schools of Islam and having them issue a joint condemnation of the killing of innocent civilians, and affirmatively what they're for. And those of us who were paying attention really appreciated it, and it had some impact till the bombs started going off again. And one of the things that I would, it bothers me that a country like Jordan, or like Lebanon, which has institutionalized the presence of Shia and Sunni in the national government, that you guys never get enough credit for overcoming the identity politics which are troubling in Europe, troubling in the United States, troubling everywhere in the world. So I think it would be good to end on that, because I want you all to think about this. That's why I was so thrilled with the Scottish vote. The 55% of the people who voted to stay in the United Kingdom were not less proud of being Scottish than the 45% who wanted to go. They thought they could have their Scottish identity and still be part of a bigger union. This is the great question. This is what I see Hood Barak here, who've got closer to a peace with the Palestinians than anybody ever did. This is what is gripping. He's got to deal with an Israel that's worrying about whether it's possible to make peace. All these identity conflicts are awash in the world. The President Kagame sitting there tried his best to get people for years to forget what tribal group they belong to, just so they could get beyond the genocide and start thinking about the future. This is at the root of, it's everywhere in the world. So tell me how you're managing this. What do you want the world to know about the capacity of Muslims to transcend identity conflicts?
Right. Well,
and what do we have to do to help you?
Well, Mr. President, it's not a one-off thing, so you just don't do the Amman message and stop there. You have to work at it every single day, and whenever something comes up, you've got to nip it in the bud. So this time last year, you could see inside of Islam, clerics on the Shia side or the Sunni side of the divide trying to create animosities or hate, basically because of the Syria conflict. So immediately we got clerics in a conference to Jordan, inter-Islamic, to come out and say, what's happening in Syria has got nothing to do with Islam, because you have to nip it in the bud right away. And actually, the most moving part of that conference was at the lunch when two Iraqis stood up, one that was two religious figures, one Shia, one Iraqi, and they both held each other's hands and said, listen, we're both Iraqis, he's Shia, I'm Sunni. What's happening in Syria, what's happening in Iraq has got nothing to do with religion. And sort of the hair stood on the back of everybody's neck. It was just, whatever they said in the conference, that lunch and those two people speaking, that was what we wanted. 2 weeks later, we had another conference about Christian Arabs, because unfortunately these extremists are using ammunition to try and create so much hatred. Again, you have to step out there the minute these things happen to say what is happening is wrong, and you have to show leadership. So the conference we had about Christians was to bring all the Arab Christian communities and leadership and Christian leadership from outside the world to say, listen, fact is fact. Arab Christians have been part of our past, they're part of our present, and they will continue to be part of our future. They have been the building block of the Middle East for 2,000 years, and that's something to be proud of. And so whenever these things happen, you've got to nip it in the bud. But at the same time, I think there's three ways, if you will allow me to challenge these issues. So one of them is, this is how the extremists use the challenges. One of them is perceived injustices. And sometimes I know I'll get flack for this from certain circles, but a perceived injustice or an injustice by many people is the Palestinian right of existence or their future and that of Jerusalem. And I know that some of our Israeli colleagues, every time I say that all roads lead to Jerusalem, get upset at this, and you and I have heard this issue for a long time. But rightly or wrongly, extremists use the injustice of the Palestinians and the issue of Jerusalem as a recruiting for extremists. And if you saw the tragedy of what happened in Gaza this summer, there's a direct correlation to the amount of foreign fighters that joined ISIS or have been recruited to Syria over the summer because of the propaganda that these groups use. So you can't say that this is not something that you can ignore. So on a separate issue, we're here in New York to trying to see, can we get both partners back together again? Because the minute you ignore it, the minute that the Israelis and Palestinians walked away from the negotiating table, we in Jordan said, okay, let's start the stopwatch. Because we knew exactly what was going to happen. And it's not by accident that the military field hospital we have in Gaza, from Gaza 1, we kept there. Because we know Gaza 2, 3, 4, and if we don't solve this problem, Gaza 5, 6, and 7 will happen. So that is a problem that is emotional in the Arab and Islamic world that we have to deal with. In Iraq, we want to bring the Sunnis back into the fold so that they feel that they have a future in Iraq, and Jordan is in the best position to do that. That is a perceived injustice also. If we don't solve the issue of Syria and eventually tackle refugees, that's going to be a bubbling point. And as I said earlier on, there are other flashpoints around the Middle East that we have to look at comprehensively. The second part is combat ignorance. Ignorance because these groups around the world come out and say, in the name of Islam, this is what we stand for. They have nothing to do with Islam whatsoever. We and a lot of religious scholars are fighting back, but it's still at the high level. The extremist ISIL, for example, or ISIS is using a new medium. They're very popular on Facebook, the internet. So how do we develop to be able to fight them at that level? But at the same time, we also want our Western friends to also push back against Islamophobia, which is actually fueling the propaganda that these extremists want to use in the Muslim sphere to say, look, these people hate us. So it goes both ways. And then the last thing I'll add very quickly is, how do you give hope to the younger generation? As I mentioned, there's a lot of young people looking for jobs, as they are in America, that just want to make their lives better. And with these conflicts, unless we start to resolve them and give them a better hope, when a young person in Jordan, for example, that might go fight for ISIS, it's not, the majority of them may not go there for religious purposes, but when they're being offered $1,000 a month and they're sitting in the street. So how do we sit there and give the future of the Middle East and the youth, the largest youth cohort in history actually, 25 million young people coming into the workplace over the next 10 years, an opportunity for a better life? This is something that we have to tackle. And then again, sir, I want to thank you, because what CGI has all been about over the past 10 years, from my point of view, is not the short-term fix. I think the word resilience is, I think, what you stand for. And what we're trying to stand for is fix the problems on the long term. And I just wanted to thank you and your organization for standing behind Jordan. I mean, we sometimes get very frustrated that, we will always do the right thing. And I think people take us for granted that we will always punch above our weight. And again, Syria and Iraq are not going to go away in the near future. This is going to be something that we're going to have to live with for the next 2 or 3 years. There'll be added requests of Jordan. We will continue to stand up at the plate. I know that you know that, and you're trying to do the best that you can. What we're asking everybody there is, please help us be there for all of you. And again, I'm so appreciative of everything that you've done to get us.
Let's give him a hand. Thank you.